What have you done? What madness has claimed? You have betrayed me. You have betrayed the Dark Brotherhood. Why?
I don't know. It seemed like something to do, I guess.
What a start!
Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 370, here to crash my metal credibility.
With no survivors.
He didn't have the one-way ding down. That's why he blew up.
I mean, I've been threatening this for a while. We're finally going to do something about In Flames. Probably the band that I like the most that is most likely to get me made fun of by the larger metal community. And I've got a whole lot to say about them. This is going to be another one of those multi-part episodes, too.
나랑 룸 서비스를 영어로 시켜먹기였는데.
Oh yeah, I know you're thrilled. But hey, at least this episode, it's going to be about their material from before Anders Fridén joined the band. So if you out there are into death metal of the auténtico, clásico variety, this is probably the portion of the In Flames catalog that will appeal most to you. And honestly, if you haven't heard any of this era of In Flames, you might be surprised by the kind of really adventurous, original shit they've got going on here. All right, so here we go.
Long ago in a distant land.
Gothenburg, Sweden, to be precise. There was this fella named Jesper Stromblad who was playing in a death metal band called Ceremonial Oath, along with three other fellas you may or may not be familiar with, depending on how deeply you are into old school death metal. That being Anders Ewers, Oscar Dronjak, and Marcus Nordberg, all of whom are probably way more famous for Tiamat, Hammerfall, and Cemetery nowadays. Anyways, old Jesper got this wacky idea in his head.
I figured it would be a crazy idea
to combine death metal aesthetics with the kind of twin guitar harmonies you're used to hearing from groups like Iron Maiden and Thin Lizzy. Doesn't sound that wacky nowadays given all that's happened with the genre over the years, but at the time, it was a pretty far out there concept. Now, depending on what little chunks of Ceremonial Oath you may or may not have heard over the years, you might be thinking, wasn't he already kind of doing that? Then yeah, their first album does have the occasional bit of type stuff going on. And the second Ceremonial Oath, the album Carpet from 1995, basically sounds like what it is. Members of In Flames, Dark Tranquillity, and At the Gates getting together and jamming out some melodic riffs. But pretty much all of the Ceremonial Oath demos and most of their first album was much more along the lines of rather jagged and angular sounding death metal. Some real weird shit. Especially for Sweden at the time, it didn't even really sound like your standard Swedish death metal. It had a lot more in common with a band like Sinister or something like that. And that's not even to mention their demos from back when they were called Desecrator in the late 80s that were pretty much straight up black thrash. Ceremonial Oath is actually a really interesting band. I'm probably going to do an episode on them at some point. But we're here to talk about In Flames. So this Jesper guy, he has this wacky melodic death metal idea bumping around in his head. And he's hanging out with this other fella named Glenn Ljungstrom, and they decide to write a bunch of songs in this more melodic style. And thus we get the birth of In Flames, which really started out more as a studio side project for Jesper. I mean, the first In Flames album has all kinds of guest spots from members of Ceremonial Oath, and it's even got vocals done by Mikael Stane from Dark Tranquillity. For more info on the Dark Tranquillity In Flames connection, see RFI episode 344 all about Dark Tranquillity. But we're here to talk about In Flames. We're here to talk about this early era of In Flames. And I can't think of a better way to do that than to start off with the In Flames song that most people heard first. The one that they actually still seem to enjoy playing live to this day, even with nobody from this era of In Flames being in the band anymore. Behind Space. And might I just add, this is perhaps my favorite vocal performance from Mr. Stane, who sounds absolutely brutal on this album. But the real star on this release, as with most In Flames albums, at least the good ones, is the guitars. There's actually a decent amount of thrash metal influence on this album, at least to my ears. And they're all wearing Exodus shirts in the band photo. So you combine that kind of thing with a whole lot of black metal feeling and a death metal level of extremity, and more than a decent amount of Germanic power metal, you end up with this first In Flames album, which is big on these like flowing, harmonized tremolo riffs. And there are a whole lot of riffs per song, but they're very good at linking them together by playing different variations of the same riff, varying up the texture before then dancing off in a new direction like you're hearing right now, this little folky kind of bit. There's a lot of folk here too. It's a real interesting mixture of sounds that through some decidedly smooth composition manages to all coalesce into a very cohesive whole. But there's also a decent amount of super weird shit going on. I mean, even in the second half of Behind Space, you think the song's going one way, then this happens. You know, they've come back to riffs from earlier in the song. Still got them nasty Stana vocals. But then they fucking hit you with this shit. This weird, very sinister, almost folk metal-y kind of breakdown that's also got those cosmic kind of thrashy, early weird melodic death metal riffs going on. There wasn't too much out there in the death metal world that sounded like this at the time. And then they dropped this lead guitar section on it, and it's some serious shit. When they're at their best, nobody writes solos quite like In Flames. They've mastered the art of having a narrative progression to their lead guitar parts. There's almost like little mini chunks of lead guitar riffs and phrases that all link together to tell a story. It's like another miniature song inside the song. And speaking of that, the way that this song ends, the part they leave out when they play it live, is also kind of its own mini song within a song. This folky outro that has, again, its own defined sense of riff progression. It's another sort of miniature song within the song that still quotes back to themes from the main song. Like this part coming up right here is absolutely some guitar riffage type shit done in a folky acoustic guitar segue context.
How neat is that?
Far from being unnecessary, I think this little instrumental acoustic outro actually adds a lot to the overall flow of this song and its place in opening up the album. But it's not all just happy-go-lucky, folk, melodic, whatever the fuck. This album can get pretty damn dark when it wants to. For instance, the song Clad in Shadows, of which I'm going to use the demo version they recorded a year prior. It's got the same lineup as the album itself. It's produced very similarly, but it's got an extra little flourish in one of the transitions that I think is pretty neat, and I wish they'd done it that same way on the album. It opens up with this simply monstrous riff that they further developed by adding an additional guitar harmony line, this sort of flowing, bendy black metal bit going on over top of it. Then the vocals come in, and the combination of chunky Exodus-ish groovy thrash with the Swedish death metal becomes much more apparent. This band had a healthy sense of groove even back during their early days, as you hear it in this riff set right here. Real catchy yet simultaneously very aggressive stuff. And then the wacky transition bit I wanted to play for you happens.
That's pretty neat.
And then, of course, you get another great In Flames solo. Again, something that has a real sense of plot development, story progression to it. Way more than is usual for a heavy metal guitar solo. It just all feels very adventurous, which is probably the best single word to describe this album. Because it tries a whole lot of just different wacky things, and most of them land pretty well. You've got the first instance of the trademark In Flames instrumental track, that being Dreamscape. Early In Flames, and honestly all the good In Flames albums, were really big on this sort of thing. Again, they're really good at telling a story with just the music. And each new development in the song feels like a new twist in the narrative of the story they're putting forward without words. But at the same time, all this music feels intensely familiar, almost like you heard these melodies in a previous life or something. At least that's how it's worked for me. Maybe it's just the overall heavy sort of high fantasy feeling that runs through the music. But they do also do that classic early In Flames thing where they reinterpret actual old folk songs, as is the case with the other instrumental on this album, Hurgalotten, which is their take on the old Swedish story of the dancing plague. Oh yeah, no, there's definitely going to be some violins showing up every now and then on this album. They were hanging out with At the Gates at the time, after all. And in fact, violin was the first instrument Jesper learned how to play before he switched over to guitar because he was into metal. There's also some real doomy darkness going on here, particularly in the song Everlost Part 1. And this one's real heavy, and it's also not what you expect from when you hear melodic death metal and doom metal in a Swedish context. You're probably thinking of stuff like early Catatonia, but In Flames kind of do their own thing with their take on that sub-genre. It's definitely dark and heavy, but it's not even necessarily sad or depressive. It's more just kind of solemn, content with itself in the natural world, and very neoclassical in its affectations. Also, the lead guitar-led outro for the song is cool as fuck, as is the counterpoint riffing that follows it that you're hearing right now. So overall, that first In Flames album, Lunar Strain, especially for something that was more of a project than a band, I think it still holds up, and I've been listening to it longer than almost any other album in my collection. I remember I bought this the same day I got my first Merciful Fate album, and I probably still listen to it at least once a month. But speaking of that sort of project feeling, that would continue on their second official release, that being 1995's Subterranean EP, which also featured a lot of session contributions. Anders Yvarp from Dark Tranquillity, drums on some songs. Daniel Erlandson from Eucharist, one of my other favorite melodic death metal bands, drums on some other ones. Perhaps most importantly of all, well, we'll get to who the session vocalist is on this album once he shows up, because it was an excellent choice. This album sheds a lot of the thrashy, rough around the edges feel of their debut in favor of a smoother, more crisp, atmospheric sound that's simultaneously a bit sharper and a bit heavier depending on how you look at it. I mean, you can hear that right in the piano-led intro to the very first song on the album, which features some interesting studio trickery to really make the riffs jump out at you. And man, oh man, is the lead guitar tone on this album absolutely perfect for what they're doing. Also, those vocals I promised. It's fucking Henke Force from Dawn, dude.
I need that.
I think I mentioned on that Dawn episode I did a billion years ago that he might be my favorite black metal vocalist. And it's really cool to hear him on an In Flames album. Gets you thinking about alternate history type stuff. Like, what if this band had actually gotten Henke as an official member and they'd just gone forward with that? Probably be in a better world. But again, as with the prior album, the real star of this release is the guitar work, which, as you're hearing now, has taken on a much more extreme metal sort of character. And of course, the leads, man. They're fucking perfect. In fact, this whole lead guitar section from Stand Ablaze might be my favorite moment in the In Flames catalog and in all of melodic death metal. I mean, this fast part coming up right here, that's some fucking 80s Halloween shit played at death metal speed. Fucking superb. But that's not even the best part of that lead guitar section, because then they go into this, I don't even know what to call it, a melodic breakdown or something. Daniel from Eucharist absolutely makes this part work. It's not super complex drumming, but he's picking the absolute perfect beats for this sort of thing. Like, holy fucking shit, dude. Stand Ablaze is an outstanding song, and if for some reason you're not into early In Flames, I got one question for you.
Why should someone be gay?
Like, what the fuck are you doing out here? I mean, I guess we all make our own lifestyle choices, but seriously, Subterranean, absolutely essential stuff. And it's not just for the high-flying melodies. Like Lunar Strain, they can get dark when they want to. For instance, on the title track, they start bringing in that weird kind of dark, folky groove that they first experimented with on that thrashy mid part of Behind Space. Pretty fucking dark and heavy. But then they juxtapose it with that same sort of very positive sounding melody. This one's got Anders Yvarp from Dark Tranquillity doing drums, and he also does an excellent job, particularly during this weird kind of tribal part right here, leading into the main flow of the song. And they're bringing back some of those dark, more thrash metally bits from Lunar Strain on this one as well, combining with those folky harmonies that then go off into outer space. Really nice subtle inclusion of keyboard work on this album as well in the background. I'm having to play it pitch shifted a bit so that this video is actually viewable in Russia and Belarus. For whatever reason, whenever I play death metal with a European copyright on it, it gets blocked in those two countries. And I know I got people over there that want to hear the episode, so you're welcome. Anyways, this thrashy explosive part. That shit's fucking fantastic. And again, the drumming is outstanding. Probably the best drumming In Flames would ever have, although Daniel Spencer did a pretty good job on the last two Good In Flames albums as well. Look at that bass marking out different musical phrases, almost like a darkened polka kind of thing going on here. Very unique sounding and very heavy, doing that kind of bass line underneath these flowing guitar lines, which have a bit of a melodic black metal feeling to them. And we're back into that triumphant ascending part from earlier in the song. Subterranean overall is fucking amazing, and I would be remiss not to at least discuss the bonus tracks that are on my copy of the EP, because we've got two alternate versions of songs that later on ended up being reinterpreted on In Flames' third official release, that being the Jester Race. But this time we got Daniel Erlandson on drums, so obviously the drums are fucking fantastic. One of them's actually got Jolke Gothberg from Marduk on vocals of all people, that being Dead Eternity, and while that is kind of a fun novelty, I prefer the Jester Race version of that particular song. But the other one, an early version of Dead God and Me entitled The Inborn Lifeless, it's got the guy from Deranged on vocals, which is pretty fucking bonkers. I guess the equivalent in Western Hemisphere death metal would be if Lord Worm was doing vocals on your Mellow Death album. But more importantly than that, Daniel's drumming absolutely uplifts a particular section of this song, and you couple that with a slightly different style in the guitar work. I gotta say, I like Inborn Lifeless more than the later version, Dead God and Me. In fact, Inborn Lifeless might be another one of my all-time favorite In Flames songs, and I don't really hear it get talked about much at all, even by fans of old In Flames. This one also leans heavily into that aggressive thrash-influenced undercurrent to In Flames' sound, but even then, you still got some cool little melodic bits here and there. You know, like that sort of thing. But from there, it goes into some almost black metal-y sounding stuff again, building tension for an evolution of the melodic breakdown sound they had on Stand Ablaze, the heaviest and most unique moment from this era. Daniel's drums absolutely make this part work. They're very simple beats, but he just picks the exact right one to make this really heavy, really weird, off-kilter shit work. And then they bring in these like slow burn guitar harmonies. It's just so fucking good. This is about as good as melodic death metal of this catchy variety gets. Particularly when they get to the third variation of it here, adding in the extra layer of droning guitar riffs for atmospheric effect, and then it expands outward with some more great kind of folky guitar harmonies, before then going full Germanic, Halloween, running wild power metal for the conclusion. Hell, this almost sounds like Queen if they played death metal.
That's pretty.
Again, you know, everybody's got different tastes, but none of that fucking raised the hairs up on the back of your neck.
Why are you gay?
I mean, that's just fucking outstanding. This whole era of In Flames is pretty fucking spectacular. But unfortunately, for my elitist, tough guy, metalhead credibility of the Cavolt variety, my love for In Flames does not stop after Subterranean. So you better bet that at some point in the near future, we're going to be venturing a little bit further into their discography than a lot of people might be comfortable with. Until then, thanks for listening or watching or whatever you did, and I'll see you next time.
Necromancy may be legal in Cyrodiil, but few will openly admit to practicing it now that the Nature's Guild has banned it. Farewell.